As we tend to do each and every week on The Informer, we reach out via Zoom to speak to any number of specialists and contributors. One of them is Angela Vithoulkas, who's always talking small business, but she's on a different tack today, and I want to touch that base. Let's talk about that, Angela. What are we going to talk about?
I think we can't avoid it. I have tried to avoid it, but the whole debacle around ScoMo and his attitude, or his sucky attitude, probably we should say, to actually acknowledging that the community feels there's an issue, because there is one, in regards to workplace treatment, a cultural shift maybe, a PR nightmare for him. But more importantly, George, I'd like to just discuss for a few minutes the fact that he is now losing all that ground, all that political capital that he's gained from COVID. It's now dwindling away, and it's just because he doesn't know how to deal with the realities of what's happening now.
I think the things that you can address is that he's been unable to address the alleged rape of one of their media staff members 2 or 3 years ago. It didn't happen yesterday, it didn't happen last week, but in their efforts they did not look out for that young woman. They did not protect her, and in fact, to hear that the man, the alleged perpetrator, was given, what do we talk about when we acknowledge that someone is leaving us? We give them, we endorse them for their next job. I can't...
Golden handshake.
No. I can't imagine you give anything golden that resembles a golden anything to this person unless it's the golden key to go to jail. He's got away scot-free. I would suggest and I would hope that every time the front door rings or the back door rings, he's trembling, because, I mean, he is next. He's got to be, as they say, brought before the courts, and this has to play out. But I think the Prime Minister's massive challenge, and for the government, has not been what they didn't do yesterday, it's what they didn't do 3 years ago, and that's come back to haunt them. And
correct.
There is no way to smooth this over. This has happened, and you and I know this. We've been around for a lifetime. We know that many young women have had to endure terrible hardship and worse, and they've had to look the other way, because if they went to the police force, the police said, "Oh, nothing much we can do." So, and employers similarly didn't want to. I think the AMP didn't want to. Address an issue in their major company with someone in the hierarchy who was behaving inappropriately, and that was a scandal. And here it is in the biggest, I suppose, building in the whole of Australia, the federal parliament. We've seen some terrible goings on. I would address it from another couple of issues too. I'd love to see security and the whole team there change the way they do business. You and I can't come into a business without an ID and get to the front door, can we?
No, but there's a couple of parallel stories playing out here, apart from the political games that are being played. So Liberal Party saying to the Labor Party, well, look at yourselves before you start pointing to us. There's those kind of internal machinations happening, and everybody's trembling in the leadership in the political parties, because they all know they are as guilty as each other. So we've got that parallel happening. We've got the fact that politicians and government bureaucrats in general think they are above any of the other ways that corporate Australia has been changing or trying to change their cultural shifts on a lot of these isms, ageism, sexism, racism, because it's not any one colour here, George. I think it's important to point out that we don't want to, quieten down the war against those other isms. They are all just as valid, and we've all faced them, right, in some way.
Yep, all the advocates out there deserve to continue to do what they do, because they're doing a tremendous job. This country has had to be dragged, kicking and screaming into the present. And we'd like to move it now into the future to help our next generation of young men and women. And it is to do with young men and women, not just young men. We have had a massive problem in the past with the way we've behaved. Some of our sporting codes have been off the charts horrible, and we've seen yet another instance there. So it's not alone in the federal sphere. And you're right, there isn't one federal politician of any colour or persuasion that should be feeling totally free and unencumbered. They've all looked the other way. Let's put it that way. At some stage or other, in their from the day they arrived in Parliament House to today, they've all looked the other way to allow much of this to go on. So, there's a reckoning coming.
There is, and I think it's important. What I really wanted to highlight for our viewers is that politicians and that bubble around them, so the people that are elected, the machinations of the parties that they represent, the bureaucrats that are within those parties, the nameless, faceless men and women that pull the strings, the actual bureaucracy of government itself, it does exist in such a vacuum and a bubble that they actually do believe they are above any of the accepted norms outside of that bubble. For some reason, the process, and I can attest to it, I will swear on the way that it's all geared in my experiences from local government, but also having been around state and federal MPs, is that they actually come through the system believing that they are privileged and better than the rest of us. And it's the whole process leads them into believing that. The whole process is at fault for making them think that they shouldn't behave any better than everyone else, or that when they do go wrong, it doesn't matter, sweep it under the carpet. There's their job, their role, their ministerial portfolio, their leader is all much more important than that one individual who's hurt. And it wouldn't fly in corporate Australia. We know that some of that's been swept under the carpet, but there is no way in corporate Australia that you would find someone who had had a grey cloud placed over them be able to continue in any position of power while there was an investigation. In fact, they would be ushered out the door as quickly and as quietly as they possibly could. And it is a sad day in Australian politics when we bring our young through the system, and there's the young Libs and young Labor and young everything else, where these young people are actually actively taught to think they are better than the people who vote and represent democracy.
They're superior. Look, there's something else that you've raised there which really just jumped out at me. There's no initiation. There's no, there's no finishing school to say you're no longer a member of the public. You're now part of the political system, and you have a different role to play. And you are not Joe Citizen or Joanne Citizen. You are now above that. You've got to behave with a different task bar, and you also have to raise the bar and behave in a manner that you never imagined that was, because you're no longer just, as they say in the storybooks, looking after your constituency, but the entire community. So that's something we need to address too.
And they spend more time inducting us as political leaders on being super aware of the words corruption and ICAC.
Yeah.
And at no time in the induction process, and in my 10 years involved in politics, have we ever been given training or seminars or awareness building around our behaviour. Yeah. So why is corruption somehow held at a higher warning, and yet the way that people have consistently behaved and treat each other seems to be, oh, who cares about that? Well, they need to care now. And we know that politically people are waking up more and more, and ScoMo has been judged because he's losing points in polling, and that's going to hurt him more than anything else. And unfortunately, that's probably why there's been that cabinet reshuffle, and suddenly we have the Prime Minister for Women.
I don't start me.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, but you know, look. It just goes to show you too that you could be, young Bradbury. Remember who won the gold medal for Australia in skating? That's young Albo at the moment, because all he has to do is just do nothing, say nothing, and march with the people, and he'll be fine. It's almost what is it? Lay down misère. Oh, now, bring it on.
This all dovetails nicely into our next topic.
Which is?
The New South Wales Ombudsman, which I'm ashamed to say I didn't know there was one main ombudsman that sat above everyone else, has just released a report in New South Wales. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I don't know if the other states of Australia face a similar circumstance, but the New South Wales Ombudsman has put out a report that is effectively 2020 hindsight on the actual pandemic and what we did or didn't do well. So it's like a scorecard, but I, have read the report and I was shocked, George, absolutely shocked to realise the actual circumstances of our seeming rights. Apparently, we have the right to complain. I didn't know we had the right to complain, but the New South Wales government itself does not have, as part of our legislation, a human rights bill. We don't have an oversight.
That's true. That's true.
So this is what the New South Wales Ombudsman has brought up, in that we weren't geared for an oversight of the way government behaved at a local, state or federal level during the pandemic, when they took away rights of the citizen and established or enforced laws. And that was lockdowns, the way the lockdowns behaved, quarantine, the way quarantines behaved. So the report points out that everything that happened in government happened and acted as isolated silos without any overarching entity having oversight to say, you're behaving badly, you're doing it well, you're doing it wrong. What we suspected is actually true, that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, that one government department didn't know what the other one was doing, and it's all too late now, but we hope we've learnt something. I celebrate this report.
Well, it's interesting you point that out, but I can tell you that's why each and every state works so hard to extend their emergency legislation, and why in Victoria they had to go to the next level and call themselves a state of disaster, because they wouldn't be able to enact anything that they did. And this is the thing that very few Australians have truly grasped. The reason why the governments have had to instill all those super emergency legislation is because they didn't have a right to do it outside those parameters. So it's all coming home, and there'll be premiers now who are in government and who maybe have just been elected, who are going to have to double back and check that their record stands up in the long run. As usual, you've got us thinking, Miss Angela. Angela Vithoulkas on The Informer, doing what she does each and every week, makes us just use our grey matter. All the very best. Catch you next week.